Like, it's weird for me. There are some people that don't feel dead, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense.
Well, I think if people leave a mark on your life and, you've loved someone, I don't think they ever really leave you. You carry them. And I know that probably sounds really cheesy, but I really do think, in memories, in food, in TV, in, things I laugh about, I remember the people that have gone. And I think, there comes a point when you can laugh and you can smile and you can think fondly.
Life today is chaotic, unpredictable, and constantly shifting. But within the chaos lies opportunity, and we're here to seize it. This is Generation Uncharted. Andrew Flewitt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, loss is something everyone experiences, yet it can feel like the rug is pulled out from under us every time it happens. So, why do you think we're so unprepared to deal with loss, and why does it hit so hard still?
I think it's because it's one of those topics which is quite difficult. So I don't think we're as prepared as we could be because we tend to avoid the topic of loss. Death, grief of any kind. It's a really difficult and scary topic. So I think the less we talk about it and the more we avoid it, when it does actually happen, it kind of shows us how unprepared we are for it. So I think the only way to kind of get through that is to accept that it's a reality of life, that it will happen, but there's no magic solution or easy way of doing that. And I think sometimes you kind of have to go through the experiences of losing to understand what that can actually do to your life and how it can impact it. But that can take time as well. There's no right way, I don't think, of processing it either.
Is there ever any sort of distinctions or difference between when someone anticipates like a loss? I'm thinking more about death here, but I think sometimes people can mourn people before that they've even died, and actually sometimes in a weird way that can be helpful to sort of almost be sort of mourning someone while they're here, whereas I think maybe sometimes when it's a shock, that maybe is what can pull the rug out from under people. I don't know.
I've kind of experienced both situations really. So, I talk about this a lot in the book, but death has kind of followed me through my life really. I lost a sibling at a young age and I don't remember them. They were 22 and I was 6. It was my dad's son. But I remember that situation being, a pivotal moment in our household where something had happened and I couldn't quite understand what had happened, if that makes sense. And, my dad, bless him, he just couldn't talk about it. It was too painful. So that kind of happened. And then in my 20s, I lost a friend. And then I've lost, a father-in-law and a parent. So I think, I've been in situations where it's been a real shock. And also when there's been, preparation for it as well. I don't know if there's an easier way. I mean, yes, you can say you prepare yourself for it if you know someone's, passing with cancer, for example. But then I also think about when someone does die, and this is the thing we don't talk about as well, is a lot of people that are around you and want to support you, if they're co-workers or friends, some great helpful people in the world. But after a while, people stop talking about the loss that you've experienced. So what I also found quite difficult through my experiences was, for example, I take my friend, I remember after her funeral, I was 23 and I remember thinking, well, what now? So that's it. We just now move on and we just now accept a life where this person who was such a part of it has gone. So I think the grief kind of continues even after the death or after the event. There's so many moments where grief can hit. And I would say that would probably happen, if it's a death you're expecting or a sudden one, you can't prepare for any of that. It's very, very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you ever really get over grief. And I think that that is a big thing, though, of how do you honor the person? I know that some people will get a tattoo or other things, or they maybe keep some ornaments from that person. Like, I have so many of like my grandparents' ornaments that I'm just waiting to display somewhere. I'll tell you what was really interesting for me though, like losing my nan was one of the biggest losses that I had. Well, both of them really, like both nans played such a big part in my childhood. But what was really weird was when I had kids and I'd be playing with them or things like that. I'm like, oh, like they're coming out in me. Like that's a phrase my nan used to say. And actually, in a weird way, having kids is almost like brought a sense of having them back. Because it's weird because I'm like, I would love to have known what both of them would have thought of the kids. And I think you almost get sort of annoyed sometimes where like, a big news story will happen. You're like, oh my God, what would they have said about this? Or something's happened in the family. It's like, oh, imagine what Nan would have said about that. So I feel like you get those moments where you're just like you feel it. So it's never sort of done.
No, and I think it can hit you in different ways. So sometimes I will think about my dad, for example, and I will laugh about something because I think about something he would have said, or him moaning at me or something like that, and I would just, I would talk to my sister and we'll laugh about it. And there's other moments where, I've been in a situation, goodness, a few years after my friend had passed away, I remember watching something on the television and thinking, oh my God, that is so funny, she would love that. And there's always that moment of thinking, I must call her and tell her. And this was like
Yeah.
4 years after she'd passed away, and I was like, oh, I can't do that. And so sometimes it's even that kind of, you have those moments or those memories or those things that kind of, help you through grief, but sometimes you forget that it's actually happened as well. Even with dreams, you dream about people and then you wake up and you think, are they here? No, they're not. And it was a dream. And then that's almost crushing in itself because you think, wow, I thought they were here. That is the reality. It almost like hits you again.
It's
Yeah, it's a
weird. I
tricky one.
definitely have people where I'm like, if they walked into the room right now, life would just carry on as normal, as though that never happened. It was all just sort of a dream. Like, it's
Yeah.
weird for me. There are some people that don't feel dead, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense.
Well, I think if people leave a mark on your life and, you've loved someone, I don't think they ever really leave you. You carry them. And I know that probably sounds really cheesy, but I really do think, in memories, in food, in TV, in, things I laugh about, I remember the people that have gone. And I think, there comes a point when you can laugh and you can smile and you can think fondly. I think that's a misconception with grief as well, is that people think you should be in a constant state of mourning, and there isn't a right way to deal with grief. You really have to process it in your own way and not worry about someone judging you because you're laughing or because you're still smiling, or, what can you do? You have to find a way of carrying on and moving through life in the best way you can, because your life's just as important, and it's needed.
So you've written a book
Have,
about
yes.
dealing with loss.
Yeah.
So whether it is losing a loved one, or whether it's a relationship, or even like loss of self, like how can
Mm.
people start rebuilding when they feel that they've experienced a loss? And what have you sort of learnt through writing the book?
I think for me, the thing that stands out the most is that, you can't escape loss, and we have to walk towards the pain of it, whether that's a death, whether that's losing your sense of identity, a friendship, a relationship. Thinking about, sometimes we have losses in our lives and we don't even realize it's been a loss. So something will happen to us, or we'll go through an event, and then later on we think, wow, that really robbed me of that opportunity, or I'm grieving that opportunity because of that situation or whatever. And then grief will come up because we feel disappointed. And I think that, what I've learned throughout the last few years is that you really have to walk towards it head on, and you can't avoid the pain of it. After my dad passed in 2023, I then went through a number of other changes in my life. So, I'm no longer in touch with my family, my biological family. That was a really difficult decision to make, but it was one that I needed to make. And then me and my husband separated for 9 months. So that was in the space of 5 months. Yeah, so in that time, everything that I'd kind of known or had created a sense of family or stability around me had kind of gone. And I took myself off for a holiday for 3 months. I was on a sabbatical, and I was in Gran Canaria in the sun. I'd never traveled solo, and I had the idea for this book, and I was being a bit creative, and I really just sat there with my feelings. Not always. Sometimes I wanted to run away. Sometimes I wanted to escape and not think about anything and have a gin and tonic and a drink just to forget. There's no right way of dealing with any of this. But the more and more I walk towards my feelings, and have done since with writing the book, with speaking to other people about their experience of losses. And, I just kind of feel like it helped me to heal, and it's brought me to a bit of a full circle moment where 2 years later, I'm having these conversations, the book's written, it's coming out, yeah, there's no easy way of kind of dealing with it, I guess.
Just one of the things that popped into my head then when you were talking about a lot of loss at one time. Is there anything you've encountered in like your research for the book around people trying to avoid loss? So say if, for example, you've stopped talking to your family, you and your husband are separating, and you really hate your job, but you're like, I can't deal with any more change, so I'm just going to stick with this, even though the job is in a bad situation, because I can't deal with more change. Is there anything about the tactics people, and obviously if it's a death, there's not much you can do about that, but when it comes to relationships or jobs or things like that, is there anything about people doing unhealthy things because they just don't want to experience the loss, so they'll just stay in a bad situation?
Yeah, I mean, my goodness. So I've interviewed some amazing people as part of the book. The person that sticks out in this situation, I guess, there's probably a few, but so Nathaniel J. Hall is an actor. He was in It's a Sin. He's currently touring his play. He's very open about his HIV diagnosis, and he's a real activist in the HIV kind of arena. And he talks about how for a long time he avoided his diagnosis because I think it was for about 15 years he wasn't out to his family about it, and what pushed him to come out with that diagnosis and tell people and then become a visible activist. He went from kind of being unknown to on television and etc. very, very quickly, was the fact that he decided to write his first play called First Time, which was all about kind of that situation. So I guess he talks in the interview about that time and hiding essentially a big part of his life and then carrying the stigma and the shame with that as well. So maybe that answers your question, but I think we all probably have coping techniques or tactics that we use to kind of get through things to avoid. And I think there's probably examples of so many people doing that. I think you can only really address the loss or the situation you're going through when you're completely ready to do so. Go back to what I said earlier about there being no right or wrong way of processing grief. And that's with situations that you're dealing with as well. I think you have to kind of do it in your own time.
There's no right or wrong way, but
No.
have you encountered, unhealthy ways that people have dealt with grief? And what are some of the red flags people need to be aware of if they're experiencing loss and think, oh my God, actually, I am pushing people away, for example? Are there any unhealthy ways that people need to be aware that they can do?
Yeah. I mean, there's people have dealt with loss in very different ways. For me to say whether it's unhealthy or not is that's not really my place. I don't think. I think
Right.
every example that someone has given me within the book about their own personal situation has been their lived experience, and I think it's really important that that's their story. That's for them to own. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think, from my own personal experience, which I can speak about, for me, it's about walking towards the situation you're dealing with. I kind of feel like what I've learned over the years personally is that the more we try and avoid something or avoid whether that's loss or any situation that we're dealing with, it could be mental health crisis, it could be an uncomfortable conversation with someone, the more you avoid it, the more your mind kind of goes, I'm still waiting, we still need to have that conversation, this is still here to be dealt with. It doesn't ever really kind of go away. So my advice for that would be in the right time, to face it head on. But my learned experience on that situation is it will always be there as well. We can't escape this stuff. That it's bothering us for a reason, I think. So it's important when we feel ready to deal with it. But also, good support network around you as well. You don't have to do it alone. Good therapist. I advocate therapy. I've been through therapy a few times. I'm in therapy at the moment, not because my life is in a bad situation, but because it's preventative for me. It's a way of checking in and making sure that I'm looking after myself.
I've heard about this preventative therapy, sort of let's get in there before I have an issue that needs fixing or dealing with.
Well, I don't think that, even when you go through therapy or you deal with a difficult situation, I don't believe it ever really leaves you. You can heal from things, but there's always stuff that's kind of going to be there to deal with. And also, none of us are finished products, we all carry pain or shame or experiences that have been difficult for us in the past, in our lives, in everyday lives. And sometimes when we become self-aware, we can notice stuff and think, okay, that probably isn't a healthy habit that I have, or okay, I've had quite a reaction to that situation. Why did I have that reaction? So to be able to go to someone who's independent, doesn't have an opinion, isn't going to judge you and say, I'm feeling a bit like this at the moment and this is bothering me. It's just good to have that conversation, I think. And so, yeah, for me, it's not about preventing any more difficulties, but it's just like checking in and kind of understanding that I've got flaws and we're all flawed and we need to deal with these things sometimes.
Yeah, well, you've just reminded me actually, when my nan died, I did do therapy because I was at uni at the time and it was just a service they offered. And it was so weird because, as people that know me know, I don't really cry. Like, there's only one thing that makes me cry, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't want people to
Okay.
know. But but like happy cry. But like I just tend to not cry. But I like got this therapy session anyway, but I think it was because it was a complete total stranger that didn't know anything, and he was like, why are you here? And I was like, my nan died, and
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
literally just like emotionally completely collapsed and just cried for like an hour. But then in a weird way, and I think it's because I don't usually cry, it was like afterwards I felt fine. I was like, okay, that's sorted now. Like it's such a weird thing. It was like he didn't even do anything. He didn't need to go to therapy school for that. Like he just sat there and asked me like what's happened, and I did the rest myself. I just cried.
I always laugh with my friends that therapy is like 95 quid an hour. And, I'm lucky to be able to pay for it, but 95 quid an hour. And my therapist is great, but he says a few things throughout the hour. It's me mostly talking. And then I pay him and it's like, wow, this is
Easy
a good
money.
gig. Maybe I should have chosen a different career though. But no, in all seriousness, it's really helpful. And I think that it's a great thing if you can access it. And there's loads of free services out there. But if, even, my last employer, I had private medical insurance and I was able to get therapy for free through my private medical. I don't know, all companies have that, but a lot of people do offer those kind of benefits. And I think if you're struggling in any way and you can just tap into someone and have a conversation, even if you realize it's not for you, at least you've tried it. There's a lot of misconceptions about therapy, but I'm a real advocate. I think it really does work.
So look, on this podcast, I do like to leave people with like bits of hacks and things. So that's how I tend to ask a lot of these questions. So when someone has experienced a loss, let's move away maybe from death, because that's very heavy. But when it's, say, the loss of your job, or the loss of your home, or the loss of your relationship, like, what are the things that you've seen for helping someone sort of redefine their identity? Because I think when you lose a person, that's one thing. But almost your job and your home and your relationship, that's part of you as a person. So when you've got to then navigate, well, who the hell am I if I'm not married to this person and live in this place? Like, how do people navigate that? Or how have you navigated that?
Yeah, I mean, what I should say is from the outset with these, and I probably should have said this from the outset, is that I'm not an expert in loss. I have been through situations, I have my own personal experiences, and I've written a book about it based on, my own experiences, but also by interviewing some amazing people. But it is a topic that I am very passionate about now because of lived experience. But, I can't claim to know every solution to every situation. But I think, if I think about, take my marriage, for example, me and my husband are still together. We managed to move forward and it's great. We've had a second opportunity. But for a long time, my identity was kind of part of a relationship. And, we met when I was 21 and I'm 40 now, and he was 23 and he's 43. So, we've been together 20 years this year. That's a long time. And, we met at a time where you're kind of really developing and understanding who you are as a person as well. So 21, you don't really know anything about life, do you? You just you're starting to get comfortable maybe with yourself, but there's still a long way to go. It's a really tricky time during your 20s. So amongst trying to discover who I was, get comfortable with my queerness, discover what I wanted from life, I was in a long-term relationship and I got married at 25 and, I was a baby when I think about that now. So for a long time, my identity was part of a duo, and almost, independence wasn't there. And that's no fault of either of us, but I think it's just dynamics that you kind of almost like form as part of a relationship sometimes. And I think when we separated, it was like, okay, well, who am I? And what do I do now? And, how do I live my life? And, living situation becomes different. Cooking becomes different. Theo always cooks. I'm not the cook. And it's simple things, but it's like
Get an air fryer.
But you just kind of like your life kind of changes, and that's in the grand scheme of things, there was a lot more pain than losing the ability to have a beautiful cooked meal by my husband. But it was it was just that kind of dynamic that we'd always kind of been part of and created. You then kind of say, well, how does this now kind of work? But then going through that separation, it needed to happen because we almost have been able to reset. And, when I interviewed Theo as part of the book, so loss of partner is one of the chapters, and we talk quite openly about our relationship and moving forward together. And I'm really proud that we've been able to do that and share that, because I think for a long time, I had this kind of like idea of perfection in my head. It was like, don't let anything go wrong in life, especially in your relationship, keep the relationship going at all costs. And, and I think that's a detriment in a way, because you then almost kind of ignore when stuff isn't going well, or the signs when you need to have those conversations or try and move forward. So what we've kind of done, I guess, as part of that interview is like, there's no kind of pretense to kind of, maintain anymore. It's kind of, it is what it is. It happened. And actually, by separating and having our time alone, we redefined who we are as individuals. And when we've come back together, and it's been over a year now, we're stronger than we were before. We're more independent, we're doing our own thing, but also collectively are strong as well. And I think it kind of needed to happen. So I guess my answer is, move towards it, you know, and navigate it in the way that you need to. It doesn't always mean that it's going to work out, and it doesn't always mean that it's going to be a happy ever after, which, by the way, I don't believe exists. I think that's kind of something we're sold, and
Don't shatter that illusion for people.
it's reality. It's like you create your happy ever afters, you create your life. We can't putting happy ever after on your life and on the person you're with is pressure. It's a pressure on you as a couple, as individuals, to have this incredible life at all times. And life just isn't like that. So we need to talk about that stuff, about, finding the one. I hate those kind of titles. It's just like, no, you meet people and you fall in love and you build really good friendships and connections and you laugh and you love and you build a life together and you hope for the best. And I hate to break everyone's illusions here, but I really do think that's a healthy way of looking at life. And you then build what you can from the change, and that might be by yourself, it might be together, it might be collectively. But I think that was probably the experience that I had from separation. It enabled both of us to find ourselves again as individuals and start afresh. And I think that's a really healthy way to live.
I wanted to talk to you about voluntary loss. So thinking of, a really famous example at the moment is Prince Harry, who has obviously chosen to leave his country, go with his wife, and obviously we're led to believe in the papers, that there's some element of separation from his family in that. So when a loss is voluntary, like, what are your thoughts around how you deal with that? Because is there a sense of you're not allowed to feel sad or experience a loss because you chose it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, I can't claim to know anything about that situation that he's going through, so I won't comment on that. But I can speak about my own experiences, and making a decision like that, is tough. It is really, really difficult. And I made a decision to, and I don't go into this in the book on a personal basis, because actually that's not fair to do that. There are people involved and I don't want to hurt anyone. And I think that's the important thing to kind of say, is like, you make decisions that you feel are right, but it doesn't mean you're out to get people or to hurt people. But it's still painful, I mean, it's 2 years on now. I feel like the decision I made to walk away from my family was the right one. For me, it was just about the relationships weren't healthy. And it happened at a time that was really, really difficult because my dad was dying. But it became evident that it just wasn't something that would ever change. And what we have to realize sometimes is that staying in a situation, you're still contributing towards that toxic dynamic. So for me personally, it was kind of like, make a decision that supports myself and my life to be able to move forward in the best way possible. Now, does that mean that I'm not sad or that I didn't grieve that situation? Absolutely not. It's a really difficult one to make. It meant that I didn't go to my dad's funeral, for example. I made that decision. It's tough decisions to make. They're not to be taken lightly. And, there will be people in my old life that will not understand it and will never understand it and will have opinions about it. And that's absolutely fine. People are allowed to have their opinions. But I think, no one should assume that any decision like that is made is taken lightly. It's heartbreaking to know that that's a decision you have to make. Having said that, dealing with the losses that I've dealt with in the last couple of years, moving my life forward now, I now feel like I'm in a place where actually things have happened for the right reasons and I'm comfortable with my decisions. But it's, it can be really, really tough. And I don't think it means that someone is not grieving for the life they had or the situation they've been through. It's, you don't wake up one morning and think, I'm just going to leave my family or cut off contact. Well, that didn't happen for me anyway. It's a chain of events, which means that you get to a point where you think, okay, is this healthy for anyone? And also, I still think about, and I've said this a few in another interview, we don't have long in this world. We have to really enjoy it. And people say, well, someone could die and something could happen, and what about if that person's not around and you don't speak to them again? And that's all really, really true. But I could die tomorrow. I could be hit by a truck. So how do I want to spend my time?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's a really tricky one. I think every situation is probably really unique with that. But one thing I do think is sometimes people, like I was saying before, I think people like drag things out because they're scared of the loss. Whereas actually it's like sometimes if it's a loss that you're going to have to voluntarily choose, don't rush it. I think you have to do things when you're ready, but also don't think that the nice thing to do is dragging things out.
No, no. As I said, I don't think you just wake up one morning and choose to do something like that. But when you do make that decision, it's not easy and there's no right way of doing it. It's actually really, really tough.
Moving on a little bit, do you think that companies and, should there be something that governments do to sort of give people time off or support people with loss? I know obviously some companies have individual policies, but I don't believe that there is an overall thing of, people getting days off from work to deal with loss. Obviously, there's a little bit around grief, but say if you broke up with your boyfriend or your husband, do you think companies should give time off for that in the same way they would if you were just ill? Or
Yeah, I mean, so my day job, I work in HR. I'm an HR business partner, so kind of that's my field of expertise, I guess. Most HR policies would have something around compassionate leave. It would, say something about you're entitled to X amount of time off for compassionate leave to deal with unforeseen circumstances. If they don't have those, I'll be very surprised. But there's probably some companies that don't have that policy. But you should really give compassionate leave, I think.
and do you think with that, like, because I obviously if someone has died, like no one's really going to argue with that. But do you think that there are some people that would feel like I don't want to tell them I've broken up with my boyfriend or whatever it is, so I'm just not. I'm just going to tell them I've got the flu or something like that.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I think that's a number of things. Is this relevant? Is it shameful? Will people take it seriously? So yeah, and I think this also comes back to what we mentioned at the beginning of the episode is around talking about loss and actually being upfront about it and it being a real conversation that happens. Because if we don't talk about loss and we don't talk about our experiences, we don't normalize those type of situations, and then they do become othered, don't they? And they become something that people are scared to ask for. So I think companies that I've certainly worked for, I think do the right thing. I think going back to about the government and about loss. I mean, I don't know every policy they have or what they've got in place, but I do think there is something around how do we normalize the conversation of loss? How do we teach people from a young age how to navigate grief and lose at a really young age, and then they get support when that's happened. But that moment is so instrumental in their life, in their brain development, because it's like a trauma that they've kind of gone through and they've had no preparation of how to deal with that. So I'm not suggesting that you're able to teach like a 6-year-old everything they need to know about grief or anything like that, but actually how do we normalize the conversations in schools, in education, to talk about the realities of life in a way that kind of helps kids to understand that life will have its difficulties, and actually you can reach out and you can talk to people and you can ask for help and that kind of thing. So I guess it's like mental health awareness. Maybe there is some stuff that happens. I'm not a teacher and I've not been at school for a very long time now, but certainly when I was growing up, that was very, very absent. So, if that's now happening, that's amazing. I think, yeah, we've got to try and prepare people for that. And, in terms of organizations, good policies that support, people having time, to support them when they need it. But again, well-being programs, educational programs where people can really learn about topics like grief and loss and be able to understand what support they can get and how they can ask for help if they need it.
Let's move on to find out a little bit more about you then. So this podcast, Generation Uncharted, what we really want to be doing with this podcast is just looking at how we are navigating the uncharted waters. We live in such a weird time where you can't really compare yourself to your parents' generation the way that they probably did. The technology is changing all the time. Social norms are changing. Like, it's really odd to figure out how you want to live, if you're living well, and by what standards, and what good looks like. So my first question to you, is there anything that now, at your age, you would find embarrassing? Or you feel that at your age now, you have to have sort of a certain things sort of, like some people are like, oh well, I have to have a mortgage by this age or whatever it is there anything that you kind of put pressure on yourself to have sort of done by a certain age?
I don't think so, but I think I was probably really sensible, and I wish when I was younger I could have been a bit more carefree. Naughty. So I'll give you an example. Not so much naughty. I'll give you an example. So I went to Ibiza. This is, my friends laugh at this now, but I went to Ibiza when I was 19 and I had the most amazing time. I loved it. It was like my first holiday. I'd just come out like 6 months before. I went with a then friend and met these people. It was 2004. Lola's theme, Shapeshifters, was on constantly. I'm a different person. That tune, it was like my coming out anthem. And I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, I want to go and be a rep in Ibiza for the next summer. I want to do it. And at the time, I was working in a call center as an insurance advisor, and I'd got like a promotion, and I think I was earning something like 17 grand or something, which, is still, a lot of money. But it's in 2004, I was house sharing and, trying to go on holiday and live a life, and it doesn't go very far. But I was like, no, I need to keep this job because I need to get to the next level. And if I leave this job and I go and be a holiday rep, maybe I won't get another job and I won't be taken seriously. And it's such a trivial thing. But when you then become 40, you're like, God, I wish I had that summer in Ibiza. I wish I'd have been a holiday rep. So
Yeah.
I think for me, and I think that maybe comes from, my family have a really good work ethic. My mum and dad always worked really, really hard. They always showed us hard work, and we had family holidays abroad and things like that when we were growing up, and we were really, really lucky. But it was like my dad worked 3 jobs to kind of do that. It kind of always about getting in, money to make that kind of stuff happen. So I think the work ethic was there from a very young age for me. And also I think, working class background as well. It's kind of like, if you don't have a job, how are you going to have money? I didn't have this kind of like trust fund or pot of money to fall back on. I was living in a house share with friends, no savings, earning 17 grand a year. It doesn't go far. So if you don't have a job, how do you pay your bills and how do you live, essentially? So that mentality, I think, is kind of in the mind. So I, from a very young age, had that kind of responsibility. So if I could go back, I probably would just have had that summer. And
Yeah, what? As you're talking about your lost summer in Ibiza, I think that there's a lot of parallels with, I think that I would probably describe myself as someone that was really sensible, and sort of did everything right. And the one regret I have now is that I haven't travelled as much as I would have wanted to. And the really funny thing is, so I have a younger sister who is about 11 years younger than me, and she just finished uni. And we were talking about things. I was like, I have no regrets in life, but the only regret is just that I didn't travel more, because I went straight from uni into a job, and then I was working my way up, and it just never happened. Next time I saw her, she was like, so I've booked like a travel. I'm going to Australia, going to this place, I'm going to that place
Amazing.
for 6 months. And I was like, oh, why? She's like, I just didn't want to end up like you.
you
I didn't
fuming
want to
and you're
have
like,
the regrets. I was like, oh, okay. I'm glad I could be an inspiration in my own way of like, don't end up like him.
they're secretly really envious as well.
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's just, I'm early 30s now. I've just kind of set myself a goal of the next 10 years. It's like, right, you need to start ticking off some countries. You need to start going to do these things, because I don't, like, my granddad, who lived to be like 92, was always like, never say I wish I'd have done that. Like, just do it.
Do it.
So I try. I'm doing it right now with this podcast. Anyway,
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to ask, as we sort of think about generations, 'cause I think this is really hard to do now, is like, who do you sort of compare yourself to? I feel like, in times gone by, we might have compared ourselves to our parents. In the 90s, we might have compared ourselves to celebrities. But who do you personally, like, honestly, compare yourself to? If someone got a new, was doing something, like they moved house or whatever, you're like, oh, maybe we need a bigger house, or whatever it is, or, who do you compare yourself to?
Well, I think it's probably goes in waves. So I've definitely been that person where you see someone get another house or move or go on holiday and you're like, oh, I've not been on holiday for a while. And and I think, we're living in an age now where you see everyone's lives every day on Instagram, on social media, which has its benefits because, I'm promoting a book and a podcast. I'm literally posting most days. It's a great platform to be able to do that. But you absolutely can get envy from what other people are doing as part of that. I would say probably in the last few years, it's been creative envy. So it's kind of, I've really worked hard to try and make my podcast work. And obviously now I'm writing the book, or I've written the book and that's coming out. And I think it's easy to look at what other creatives are doing and go, they're doing that, or their podcast has had this many listens, or they've won that award, or, I don't think it ever kind of leaves you. And I think for me, it probably is going back to, it probably is about, being seen when I was younger, not feeling good enough, experiences of feeling othered or feeling that I didn't fit in or whatever. So trying to make my way so that I'll be liked. We've all got our journeys of why we do these things. And I think that it doesn't just leave you. You don't wake up one day and just think, well, okay, that's all now resolved. And it just keeps manifesting in other ways. So for me, over the last few years, it's been about, probably my creative stuff. But what I'm really trying to do is say, okay, I'm in my lane, I'm doing my thing, I'm really proud of what I've done. And that's the thing that I got told off a few weeks ago. I was interviewing Juno Roach as part of my podcast, which is coming out in a few weeks. And I said to her, I'm really grateful a few times about her being in the book and on the podcast. And she said, I'm going to pull some aging rank here. You know, there's nothing lucky about, you know, me being a part of this. I did this because I liked your work. You know, you're doing really great stuff, and luck has nothing to do about it. You know, you're working really hard, and that was a real wake up for me. It was like, wow, you know, at what point do you start becoming proud of what you've done and start giving yourself a pat on the back rather than waiting for everyone else to do it? Because there will never be enough pats on the back from people if you can't do it for yourself. So I'm really trying to use words like proud rather than lucky, and
Yeah.
reshape how I see my creativity. But the envy thing doesn't just go, you know, it's still there.
No, I mean, you're like me. Like, we hustle. We have like 10 different projects going on all the time, and it's really hard to manage them all and to make them all a success and make them into what you want to be. And like, one piece of advice someone gave me once was just compare yourself to you from last year. Don't compare yourself to someone that's got 10 million followers or has written 5 books or has got their own TV or whatever it is. Compare yourself to you of last year. Now, I don't know whether that's healthy or not, but that's sort of what I try and do, is like one up myself from last year.
Yeah, I like that. That's really good.
Tell me a little bit more about your podcast then. So, what audience are you serving? What are you looking to achieve with it? Who have you got coming on? Plug it so people know where to go.
Yeah, so it's called Queer I Am, the podcast. You could probably see the old logo in the back. It's changed now. But I started it in 2022 when I first moved to Brighton. So I was having all these really great conversations in the pub over a gin and tonic. I think, well, if I go back a bit, in 2019, I really found like queer history and the community just so important. Was part of a Pride committee and organised Pride in my local hometown. So, you know, it was in Ipswich. We had about 4,000 people attend this Pride event, but when I was growing up, there was nothing like that. So to have a committee come together and create this event was just incredible. And I started working with these really amazing people, such a diverse community. And then I just started to get really interested in queer history. So I started reading books, watching documentaries, that kind of stuff. And I think that was a journey of me becoming more comfortable in my own skin and learning about, you know, the history that I'm part of and feeling proud as well to be a part of it. So when I moved to Brighton, I was like, I want to start these conversations and keep them going. So I literally just thought, okay, let's do a podcast. I've had the idea before. I'm going to give it a go. So it's been a real learning experience over the last kind of 3 years because I've never done anything like that before. And, you know, everything from writing it, recording it in the studio, helping to produce it, promoting it, all that kind of stuff. It's been such an experience. But the podcast is about celebrating and amplifying queer voices in our community. And season 1 was local people that I interviewed in Brighton. Season 2, we went a bit further afield and I got some really amazing people as part of that who were outside of Brighton, but spoke to a number of different artists like authors, drag queens, musicians, that kind of stuff. And then for season 3, I did live shows. So I had a panel of guests for each show in Brighton. So I think we interviewed 32 people over 8 weeks. We had an audience. It was filmed for YouTube. And that was in the middle of me just losing my dad, going through my breakup. And I literally finished the last show and then went to Gran Canaria. But that show kind of kept me going because it was like focus. And I think that's what I've learned from this whole experience as well, is that creativity is a bit of a savior for me. It's like, it helps my mental health. It helps me feel good. It gives me purpose and it gives me drive and passion about something. And I think the podcast has really been so amazing for that. But it was, when I got to the end of 2023, I then did a mini season and like 5 episodes. And I was like, I'm exhausted. It's been a year and a half. I've done like 50 episodes, 4 seasons. I'm a bit tired. But now it's coming back and I've interviewed a lot of people that are part of the book. So we've talked about, you know, the experience of being part of the book and what people can expect from the interviews and that kind of thing. So that's really exciting. And season 6 is in the works as well for a summer beach read season. So I'm already starting to plan that. And I've got a number of great guests that are going to be appearing on that one as well. So yeah, it's been great. It's been such an amazing thing to be a part of and to have created. And, you know, the book is kind of the cherry on top of an already amazing, fabulous queer cake that I've been baking for the last couple of years, and it just feels like it was a natural next step from creating the podcast, if that makes sense.
So, my final question, really, for you. One of the things that I think our uncharted generation deals with is a sense of home these days, of not really knowing where is the place to be. You know, they sort of, there's that saying, like, if you're tired of London, you're tired of life.
Mm,
Well, nowadays, I feel like most, like, young people are like, well, I can't even afford London anyway, and I'm tired of it, so count me out. I feel like a lot of people don't know where to go. You know, should they go to the big city and just spend all of their money on rent? And that's living, but I can say I live in a big city. Is it that, you know, you go to a beach or a seaside town? Is it a smaller city? Do you want to, you know, with remote working now, actually, do you want to go abroad? And I think for younger people, it's quite hard to know A, where to make a home,
yeah.
and B, to have that community. I think a lot of people are isolated now. And so I just want to make sure I'm asking every guest a little bit about what their home is like, what they love and maybe don't love about where they live, and how they build a community in that area for themselves, and how they make basically where they live work for them.
Well, I live in Brighton and I've been here for 3.5 years now. Before that, I lived in Suffolk, which is my home county, and I lived there for 37 years. So, you know, after COVID, it was like, right, what's next? We'd been in lockdown for however long, and it was like, let's make a change, let's do something different. So for me, this is probably the best thing that, you know, my husband and I have ever done. Brighton is incredible. I love that we have this really unique city. It feels like a bubble. It feels like you arrive in Brighton and then you're in this bubble and nothing else kind of exists outside of it. But it's full of creatives. It's full of queerness is so visible. It's full of, you know, just very kind of bohemian type people. Lots of individual like shops and coffee shops and beautiful seaside and so much art. There's always something kind of going on. You know, we're so lucky. May is around the corner. Fringe will start, Brighton Festival, then we'll have Pride, and it's just like the summer comes alive in Brighton, and there's just so much to do. But I think, you know, it took us, I don't know why it took us so long. Maybe it just wasn't the right time to come here. Maybe COVID was the kick that we needed to make a change in our lives. But now we're here, I can't ever imagine living anywhere else in the UK. And I think for me as well, what's happened as a result is my creativity. You know, I wouldn't have been able to do what I've done in my hometown. I just wouldn't have had access to,
In what way?
I don't think I'd have had access to the people that I've interviewed, the experiences that I've had that have helped me navigate kind of my creative life. It was just a very, very different place to live. It's very conservative, very kind of rural town. You know, I kind of stuck out there. You know, it's not many people like me. So there probably is. We're just doing our thing and trying to blend. Whereas you come somewhere like Brighton and you're visibly invisible. I described this once and someone said, what? And I was like, I'm visible because I'm out and I'm proud, but I'm invisible because I blend with so many people like me. You know, I'm not sticking out like someone that, you know, I don't look like something that someone hasn't seen before. I walk down the street and, you know, there are other people like me. There's other people like me and my husband. There's an aliveness about our community being here, which is just wonderful. And I've made the most incredible group of friends as well. You know, I have an amazing chosen family, which, you know, bring me so much joy, and, you know, found my tribe really here. Life really started to happen after 2021.
And what's
you know,
it like? My big question, because it's my pet peeve with anywhere, is how long does it take to travel generally? Like, if you're going to go see a friend, how long does it take you to go and get
no
that
time.
coffee?
Okay, if I'm going to a local coffee shop to meet a friend, 15-minute walk. So
Okay.
I'm literally 15 minutes that way from the beach, 15 minutes that way from the lanes and the city centre. My friends all live around me. So it's not like in London. Like, my nephew lives in London. If he wants to go and see a friend, he jumps on a tube. An hour later, he's seeing his friend. If I want to go and meet, if I get on a bus here, I'm somewhere in 5 minutes. You know, Brighton isn't that big in terms of the city centre.
How true is it that it's basically London on sea for price? Is it pricey, or is it a little bit better than
I
London?
mean, yeah, it is expensive. So let me give you a contrast. When we moved here, we sold a 4-bedroom house and we bought a 1-bedroom flat with the money.
And you
So
had no change.
no,
Oh my God,
maybe a little bit of change, a little bit.
that is wild.
Yeah. So
I
yeah,
mean, I
very
guess if
different.
you didn't need the other three bedrooms and you prefer the sea, fine, but
Well, we
my
did need
God.
the other 3 bedrooms, so we have moved house now. But
Oh, okay.
at the time, it was like, yeah. And I think also as well, you know, we were just like, we're not sure how it's going to work out. We want to be sensible. We don't want to overextend ourselves. Let's just kind of see how it all kind of works out. Yeah, and you know, things like, I don't know, you go for a coffee. I mean, I walked in a coffee shop the other day and they were selling hot cross buns for £3, and I'm like, I'm not paying £3 for a hot cross bun. That's crazy.
That is
So,
crazy.
but if you're visiting and you're going out for coffee and cake, you don't think about it, do you? You just tap your phone and then you kind of, you know. But I think when you are local here, you probably know where to go, where you're going to get a good cup of coffee from, where you don't need to go and spend your money there or whatever.
Right, okay. So
But it's,
avoid the tourist traps.
yeah,
I always
probably.
think with places like London and Brighton, there should be like a residence card that gives you sort of 25% off, because
Yeah,
clearly the prices are high for tourists.
yeah, yeah. But it's amazing. There's so many things about the city which is just incredible, and it is a bubble. And I think it's very addictive as well. Like when I first moved here, I went out a lot. Like I was going to see drag shows like 4 times a week. I was down the pub making new friends, and I say friends because, you know, I don't know, you meet people in the pub. I don't drink now and I don't see them. So, you know, you have to kind of, you know, there are some people you meet and you keep in touch with, and there's some people that maybe they are there for a purpose at that time, and that's cool. You know, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but I think, you know, after a while.
Yeah.
But it does become very addictive to kind of to do that stuff. And I think having come from a rural town where none of that was kind of accessible to me, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was like, oh my God, like I can literally go to the pub on Tuesday night and watch a drag show and have gin and tonic. And then, you know, and Wednesday and Thursday. And then, yeah. So,
All
probably
right,
could have
there's
got,
your pitch for Brighton for
yeah,
anyone
yeah.
listening.
Well, it's the pitch, but also just chill. Come here, have a lovely time, but just take it easy as well. That's
Yeah.
probably my one bit of advice.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, there's a final question, and you're
Yes.
my guinea pig for this to see if this
Ah.
final feature works. So, I want to finish every episode on a positive note. So, can you tell me a recent funny story or heartwarming moment?
I'm part of a writing group, and I came back from my writing group a couple of weeks ago, and I walked into my kitchen, and I had 5 friends around the table, or 4 friends, and my husband, and they're doing a writing group themselves at the moment called The Artist's Way. Have you heard of this? It's like a book. It's called The Artist's Way. It's like you do morning pages, and it helps you to kind of discover your artistry. And yeah, so as a group, they've decided to do this. So every Wednesday, he cooks them all dinner, and they sit down and they talk about their creativity, and they talk about their blockers and their milestones and how they're getting on. And I came home and opened the door, and loads of people that I love was in the same room, and they're all sitting there talking about creativity. And sometimes the conversations get really, really deep, but it's a safe space. Everyone means it with love. And I don't know, for me, that was really heartwarming, because it's like, wow, these are our people. This is just, you know, how lucky to come home on a Wednesday evening after already going to do something amazing like being part of a fiction writing group with these other people, and then come home to my actual house, see the people I love around the table, all chatting, laughing, eating. You know, for me, that's home. That's the purpose of chosen family and home, and, you know, finding your people. So I would say it's a heartwarming story, but it's one that kind of meant a lot to me.
That's a lovely note to end on. Andrew,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.